The rain came down hard that night, and Yin Yu Tian lay flat on wet concrete, staring up at a sky that gave him nothing back. Blood pooled beneath his head. His vision blurred at the edges, then sharpened, then blurred again. Somewhere above him, a soft blue light flickered into existence, hovering just past his nose. A single question hung there, patient and cold. Do you wish to continue? He did not understand it. He barely understood anything anymore. His ribs screamed with every shallow breath, and one eye had swollen shut from the last kick to his skull. Somewhere in the fog of pain, a strange thought surfaced, sharper than the rest. The blue box wasn't lined up straight. It sat crooked against his vision, tilted maybe 3 degrees to the left, and something in him, some deep and furious part of his mind, could not let that go. Not even now. Not even dying. His fingers twitched. He reached toward the light, not to save his life, but because it offended him. Because it was wrong, and wrong things needed to be fixed. He pressed against the option that glowed the brightest. Yes. The pain vanished all at once, like someone had reached into his chest and pulled a plug. Warmth spread through his limbs. His vision cleared. And for one confusing second, Yin Yu Tian wondered if he had actually died after all, and this was simply what came next. Then the system spoke again, and everything about his life changed. But to understand how a 20-year-old college student ended up broken and bleeding in the street, you had to go back 1 hour. Back to a park full of flowers, and a mistake that cost him almost everything. Chuang University sat on the edge of the city, its courtyards lined with old trees, and its dorms packed with students, who mostly kept their heads down and their grades up. Yin Yu Tian was one of them. Ordinary in every visible way. No family fortune, no hidden talent, no destiny anyone could see coming. He did have one thing that set him apart, though most people mistook it for something else entirely. His mind would not let go of disorder. A crooked picture frame could ruin his whole afternoon. Papers stacked unevenly on a desk itched at the back of his skull until he fixed them. People joked that he was uptight, or particular, or just plain strange. None of them called it what it actually was. Obsessive-compulsive disorder. Severe, untreated, and quietly running his entire life. That evening, he had been walking home from the library, and he had been walking past the central courtyard, and that was where his problem started. Someone had arranged a giant heart out of 1,000 roses. Red and white petals formed a perfect symbol on the courtyard lawn, clearly built for a public marriage proposal. Students had gathered in a loose circle to watch, phones already raised. At the center of the heart stood a young man in an expensive coat, practicing his speech under his breath. Yin Yu Tian might have walked right past it. He almost did. Then he noticed the flaw. One corner of the rose heart sagged inward, uneven, a full 2 inches off from where it should have sat to keep the shape symmetrical. Nobody else seemed to notice. Nobody else cared. But to him, that sagging corner screamed louder than anything else in the courtyard. He crouched down before he even decided to. His hands moved on their own, gently lifting the roses, repositioning them, restoring the shape to what it should have been. It took him under a minute. In his mind, it was simply a wrong thing being made right. To the man in the expensive coat, it looked like sabotage. Wu Fan turned from his rehearsed pose and saw a stranger crouched in the middle of his proposal, hands buried in his flowers. His face went through confusion, then embarrassment, then something colder. He didn't ask questions. He grabbed Yin Yu Tian by the collar and hauled him upright, shouting that he had ruined everything, that the girl he loved was minutes away, that some worthless nobody had just humiliated him in front of half the campus. Yin Yu Tian tried to explain. The corner had been crooked. He had only fixed the corner. Nobody was listening. Wu Fan's friends closed in around him, 3 of them, then 4. The first punch caught him in the jaw and spun his vision sideways. He hit the ground hard, and after that, the beating became a blur of boots and fists, aimed at his ribs, his stomach, finally his head. He curled up instinctively, arms shielding his skull, but it wasn't enough. A kick landed square against his temple, and the world tilted, then dimmed, then went mostly silent. Somewhere far away, a girl screamed at them to stop. Fan Sui Shu had arrived that night to reject Wu Fan's proposal in person, dressed simply, no security in sight, having slipped away from her usual guards specifically to avoid a scene. She had been the target of his elaborate display, a wealthy young hunter with connections Wu Fan desperately wanted, and she had planned to let him down quietly and be done with it. Instead, she found her would-be suitor's rented thugs stomping a stranger into the pavement. By the time she pulled her own guards through on a delayed call and pushed the attackers back, Yin Yu-tian was already gone, dragged off by campus security before anyone thought to check whether he needed a hospital instead of a holding cell. Nobody connected the beaten student to the man who had accidentally saved her from a proposal she never wanted. That gap, small and accidental, would matter more than anyone in that courtyard could have guessed. Yin Yu-tian did not remember being carried out. He remembered waking somewhere behind the gymnasium, alone in the rain, his body broken in ways he was too far gone to properly feel. He remembered the blue light. He remembered pressing yes. And he remembered, more than anything else, that the box had finally straightened itself in front of his eyes, and some small part of him, even as his heart stuttered, had felt relief. When Yin Yu-tian opened his eyes again, he was lying on damp grass instead of pavement, breathing normally, his ribs whole beneath his shirt. He sat up slowly, running a hand over his own face, checking for the swelling that should have been there. Nothing. The blue light hovered patiently in front of him, waiting. Vitals restored. "Welcome, host." He read the words twice before his brain caught up with what they meant. Some kind of system had saved his life. He had no idea how, or why, and honestly, in that first minute, he barely cared. What he cared about was the small red notification bubble sitting in the corner of his vision, pulsing gently, refusing to go away no matter how many times he blinked. He tried closing his eyes. It stayed. He tried looking away. It followed. One unread quest. Complete objective to dismiss. Something in his chest tightened at the sight of it, sharp and immediate. The same itch that used to hit him over crooked picture frames, now aimed squarely at a floating menu only he could see. He needed it gone. Not eventually. Now. He opened the quest. Basic combat training. Land 100 clean uppercuts on a stationary target. Reward, skill unlock. It sounded absurd. He had never thrown a punch in his life that wasn't accidental. But the notification bubble sat there, glowing, unread, wrong, and Yin Yu-tian found himself walking toward the old gym equipment shed behind the dorms, before he had consciously decided to move at all. He found a punching bag hanging from a rusted frame, clearly abandoned years ago. He planted his feet, the way he vaguely remembered from television, and threw his first uppercut. It landed weak, off balance, barely disturbing the bag. The system logged it anyway. 100, he threw another, then another. Sweat soaked through his shirt within 20 minutes, and still he kept going, driven not by ambition or hunger for power, but by something closer to compulsion, the same force that once made him rearrange silverware until it lined up perfectly. He did not stop until the counter read 100. Objective complete. Skill unlocked. Iron Fist Uppercut. Mastery 4%. The notification bubble vanished. For one full second, Yin Yu-tian felt something like peace. Then a new bubble appeared beside the skill's percentage counter, small and steady, ticking upward as he watched his own fading energy. It read 4%, and something about that number bothered him even more than the first one had. It was low, it was incomplete. It sat there unfinished, and Yin Yu-tian understood, with a kind of dawning horror, exactly what kind of prison he had just signed himself into. He kept training that night, and the next, and the one after that. By the end of the first week, his uppercut had crossed 100% mastery. Most systems, he would later learn, stopped there. His did not. He hit 150%, then 220%, numbers that should not have existed on any normal scale, and the punching bag that had survived years of abandoned use finally split down the seam and dumped sand across the shed floor. He stood over the wreckage, knuckles raw, chest heaving, strangely satisfied. Somewhere beneath the exhaustion, a thought was already forming. If ordinary training could push a skill past its supposed limit just because he refused to leave anything unfinished, then maybe his disorder wasn't only a curse. Maybe it was the only real advantage he had. Wei Wei found him 3 days later looking half-starved, dark circles under his eyes, still faintly sore from nights of secret training nobody else knew about. She was his classmate, had been since their first year, one of the few people who never seemed bothered by his particular habits. When his pens rolled slightly out of alignment on his desk, she nudged them straight without being asked. When he skipped meals because his schedule had been disrupted, she noticed before he did. That afternoon, she dragged him to a fast food place near campus. sliding a tray in front of him loaded with fries and a burger, watching with quiet amusement as his hands automatically began sorting the fries by length before he touched a single one. She didn't laugh at him, she just watched, chin resting on her palm, something soft in her expression that he never quite noticed. "You look like you haven't slept," she said. He admitted, carefully, that he'd been working on something. He didn't mention the system. He wasn't sure how to explain a floating blue interface only he could see, and some instinct told him it was better kept quiet for now. Wei Wei let it go, but she pushed the tray closer, insisting he eat before his fries went cold, and the arrangement no longer mattered anyway. He ate methodically, row by row, and for the first time in days his shoulders loosened. Afterward, she pulled him toward an arcade near the food court, chattering about a claw machine she'd been trying to beat for a week straight, a stuffed rabbit doll trapped just out of reach behind two smaller toys. He watched her feed coins into the machine 3 times, missing each attempt by inches, growing more frustrated with every failed grab. Something about the disorganized pile inside the glass box, dolls stacked at careless angles, one leg jutting into the claw's path, itched at him instantly. He fed in his own coin, studied the pile for a long moment, and adjusted his aim not for the rabbit directly, but for the smaller toy pinning it in place. The claw dropped, closed, lifted the blocking toy cleanly away. His second attempt scooped the rabbit straight out. Wei Wei's eyes went wide as the doll dropped into the tray, and she hugged it to her chest, delighted, telling him he owed her nothing now, that this settled every favor between them for the rest of the semester. He felt, briefly, like an ordinary person having an ordinary day. It didn't last. Wu Fan's friends found them near the restroom corridor on their way out, the same group who had beaten him nearly to death less than 2 weeks earlier, apparently unaware or uncaring that their victim had somehow walked away from that night at all. One of them yanked the rabbit doll straight out of Wei Wei's arms, sneering, tossing it between his friends like a trophy while she demanded they give it back. Yin Yu Tian stepped between her and the group without much thought, and for a second the leader's face flickered with recognition, followed by disbelief that the same nobody he'd stomped into the pavement was standing upright in front of him again. They cornered him in the restroom hallway, 4 against 1, confident this would go exactly like it had before. It didn't. Yin Yu Tian's system flagged the confrontation immediately, notification bubbles stacking in the corner of his vision. Combat detected. Skill, Iron Fist Uppercut, Mastery, 178%. He barely had time to process the number before the first attacker swung. His fist met the man's jaw before the punch even landed, a single clean strike that dropped him instantly. The second came in swinging wide, and Yin Yu Tian sidestepped without thinking, his body moving with a precision that had nothing to do with instinct and everything to do with hundreds of repetitions burned into muscle memory that shouldn't have existed yet. Within seconds, all 4 were on the ground, groaning, and the rabbit doll sat untouched on the tile floor where it had been dropped. Wei Wei stared at him like she was seeing a stranger. He picked up the doll, straightened its ears where they had been crushed sideways, and handed it back to her without a word about what had just happened. He didn't fully understand it himself yet, not the scope of what the system had given him. But something told him this was only the beginning, and that the quiet, ordinary version of his life was already behind him. He threw himself into training after that, chasing the system's escalating quests with the same compulsive focus that once ruled his smallest habits. A local sports center gym became his second home, and for 3 straight days he barely slept, drilling combination strikes until his knuckles split and healed and split again, his mastery numbers climbing in ways that defied every rule the system's own tooltips claimed should apply. He didn't know yet that someone was watching the gym, didn't know that a bounty had quietly appeared on his name, or that the men beaten in that restroom corridor had reported back to people far more dangerous than themselves. He only knew that the notification bubble was gone, for now, and that for a few days, the silence in his head almost felt like something he'd earned. It wouldn't last long. Somewhere in the city, a mercenary known as Tiger Zhen Shan had already accepted a 200,000 credit contract with his name attached to it, and the ring on Zhen Shan's finger, stolen from a wealthy corporate vault, was about to make its first appearance in Yin Yu Tian's life. He had no idea what was walking toward him. He only knew that whatever it was, his hands were finally ready to meet it. The sports center emptied out around midnight, leaving Yin Yu Tian alone with the heavy bags and a row of flickering fluorescent lights. He liked it that way. No spectators to notice the strange numbers scrolling past his eyes. No questions about why a college student trained until his hands bled and healed and bled again. He didn't hear the side door open. 6 men filed in without announcement, spreading out around the mats in a loose half-circle. Their leader wore a stolen ring on his right hand, its surface etched with faint runic lines that pulsed faintly under the gym lights. He introduced himself as Zhen Shan, brother to a man named Bao. One of the thugs Yin Yu Tian had dropped in the restroom corridor days earlier. Zhen Shan didn't bother with threats. He simply stated the number attached to Yin Yu Tian's head, 200,000 credits, posted by a rich brat still furious about a ruined marriage proposal and a humiliated reputation. Then he flexed his ring hand, and a faint shimmer of enhancement magic crawled up his forearm. Yin Yu Tian's system flared a warning across his vision, a soft red pulse where the notification bubble used to sit. Threat level, moderate, recommend caution. He didn't feel cautious. He felt annoyed, the same flavor of irritation that used to hit him over crooked bookshelves, now aimed at 6 armed strangers interrupting his training schedule. The first man rushed him swinging a length of pipe. Yin Yu Tian caught the strike on his forearm, absorbed the shock through a stance his system had drilled into muscle memory over dozens of repetitions, and answered with an uppercut that folded the man over his own knees. A second attacker came from the side, and this one he ducked under entirely, sweeping the man's legs out before driving an elbow down between his shoulder blades. Zhen Shan watched 2 of his men drop in the space of 4 seconds and stopped smiling. He activated the ring fully this time, and threads of golden light wrapped around his knuckles, doubling his reach and his speed in one motion. His first real punch caught Yin Yu Tian across the ribs and sent him skidding backward into a stack of mats. Breath knocked loose from his lungs. For a moment, pain blurred his vision. Beneath it, a familiar itch surfaced, sharper than the ache in his side. His intermediate combo training, the one he'd been grinding for 3 days straight, sat frozen at 97% mastery. Unfinished. Wrong. He forced himself upright, ignoring the ring of mercenaries closing in, and focused entirely on the missing 3%. Zhen Shan swung again, confident now, expecting the fight to be over. Yin Yu Tian's counter came faster than either of them expected. A 3-hit combination his body executed on pure trained reflex. Jab to the ribs, elbow to the jaw, final strike straight into the sternum. The system's counter ticked upward with each impact, climbing past the 90% mark it had stalled at for days. Intermediate combination training, 100%. Objective complete. Something shifted the instant that number locked into place. His next punch carried more weight than it should have, more precision than 3 days of practice alone could explain. Zhen Shan's enhanced block shattered under the impact, the ring on his finger cracking down the center, its golden glow sputtering out entirely. The remaining mercenaries didn't wait to see what happened next. They dragged their unconscious leader out through the side door, leaving behind a fractured artifact ring and a gym full of broken equipment. Yin Yu Tian picked up the cracked ring, turned it over once in his palm, and set it neatly on the equipment rack where it belonged. Some habits, apparently, survived even a street fight against 6 armed men. Word of the ambush reached the Fan family within 2 days. A supreme corporate clan, one of 4 that quietly ran the hunting world beneath the surface of ordinary city life, the Fan family controlled dungeon rights across half the region and fielded some of the strongest hunters on record. Their scouts monitored unusual combat reports as a matter of routine, and a nameless student single-handedly dismantling a hired mercenary squad qualified as exactly that. 2 envoys found him outside his dorm the following morning, dressed in clean corporate uniforms, offering him a formal invitation to join the Fan family's recruit program. He almost turned them away. He had no interest in corporate politics, no ambition toward wealth or rank, only the quiet compulsion to keep training until his system finally left him alone. But one of the envoys, sensing his hesitation, opened a black case resting on the table between them. Inside sat a set of custom hunting knives, 6 blades total, each one nestled into a foam cutout shaped precisely to its outline. Every knife sat flush, every angle symmetrical, not a single edge out of alignment. Yin Yu Tian stared at the case for a long moment. Something in his chest settled, the way it always did when disorder resolved itself into order. He signed the recruitment papers without reading past the first page. The envoys exchanged a glance neither bothered hiding. They had expected to negotiate for hours. Instead, A knife case had done the job in under a minute. The Fan family testing facility occupied an entire underground complex beneath their corporate tower, its walls lined with reinforced glass and humming with dungeon-grade containment fields. New recruits gathered there in groups of 20, waiting their turn to prove themselves against a randomized portal trial. Yin Yu Tian's group drew a D-rank acid python, a massive serpent whose bite dissolved flesh on contact, kept sealed inside a training portal specifically to weed out unprepared candidates. Most recruits before him lasted less than a minute before triggering emergency extraction. He watched 3 others get pulled out screaming, their arms marked with chemical burns despite the safety wards, and understood that this test carried real risk beneath its clinical presentation. When his turn came, he stepped through the portal without hesitation, driven more by a need to finish the objective in front of him than any real confidence in his odds. The python was larger than he expected, coiled around a stone pillar, its scales weeping a faint acidic sheen that hissed against the training arena floor. It struck almost immediately, jaws wide, and Yin Yu Tian threw himself sideways, feeling the heat of dissolving air pass inches from his shoulder. His system flagged the creature's movement pattern in real time, small notations appearing at the edge of his vision, timing gaps between strikes, muscle tension before each lunge. He had never studied combat theory. He had never needed to. His disorder simply refused to let details slide past unnoticed, cataloging every twitch of the python's coiled body whether he wanted it to or not. By the 4th strike, he had mapped the pattern completely. The python always struck twice in quick succession, then paused half a second to reset its coil. He waited through the first 2 strikes, both grazing empty air where he'd already moved, then closed the distance during the pause and drove his blade directly into the soft ridge behind its jaw, the one weak point unprotected by acidic scales. The python thrashed once, then went still. Observers behind the reinforced glass exchanged uncertain looks. Nobody had briefed this recruit on the creature's attack pattern. Nobody had needed to. The registration hall processed new recruits through an automated strength sphere, a device that measured raw physical output, mana density, and combat aptitude in a single scan. Recruits queued in a long line, watching their results flash overhead in glowing letters, most landing somewhere in the D or E range, a handful reaching C. When Yin Yu Tian stepped onto the platform, the sphere flickered, hummed, and displayed a single letter above his head. F rank. Laughter rippled through the recruits behind him. Someone muttered that the acid python must have been a fluke, that the machine clearly didn't lie even if a lucky strike sometimes did. He stood there under the flashing letter, feeling no particular sting from it. The sphere measured raw stats. It had no way to account for a mind that refused to leave any technique less than perfect. He collected his registration badge and walked away from the mocking looks without comment, already thinking ahead to the next skill sitting unfinished in his queue. That night, while other recruits celebrated their placements or nursed wounded pride, Yin Yu Tian found an empty training room and began drilling with a short sword pulled from the equipment rack, then an axe, then a medieval longsword, each one gripped for the first time in his life, each one treated with the same relentless repetition he'd given his fists. He stayed 4 consecutive nights, sleeping in short stretches on a training mat, ignoring the other recruits who peered through the door and whispered about the F-rank washout, wasting his time on weapons he'd never be cleared to use in real combat. By the end of the 4th night, 3 separate mastery counters sat locked at 100%, numbers that recruits 3 years into formal training rarely reached across even a single weapon. He didn't know yet how far those numbers would eventually climb, or how soon the system would demand something far more dangerous than an empty training room. Somewhere above him, corporate schedules were already being drawn up, a squad assignment forming that would drop an F-rank recruit into a live simulation nobody expected him to walk out of. The squad assignment came 3 days later, posted on a public board outside the training hall. Yin Yu Tian scanned the list until he found his name paired with a designation he didn't recognize: Reinforcement Dispatch, Simulated Underground City Raid, D rank. He asked around and learned the basics. A squad of 6 had entered a training simulator built to mimic a real D-rank dungeon, complete with a boss encounter, calibrated to test coordination under pressure. Reinforcements were pulled in when the primary team's readings dropped below safe thresholds. Nobody expected an F-rank recruit to be useful in that role. He suspected the assignment existed mostly to see whether he'd embarrass himself in front of an audience. He reported to the deployment chamber anyway, badge in hand, and found the squad leader waiting with visible irritation already written across his face. Zhang Quan carried himself like a man used to being obeyed, broad-shouldered, a faint mutation visible in the way his eyes caught the light wrong, marking him as a berserker type. He looked Yin Yu Tian over once, clearly unimpressed by the F-rank badge clipped to his collar, and told him to stay out of the way and let the real hunters handle the boss. Yin Yu Tian didn't argue. He simply stepped through the portal when it opened, and the simulation swallowed him whole. The underground city sprawled out beneath a false sky, corridors of ruined stone lit by dim floating orbs, the whole environment humming with a wrongness that made his skin crawl before he'd taken 10 steps. His system flagged the space immediately as a full sensory simulation, warning him that damage here would register as real to his body despite the artificial setting. He caught up to the rest of the squad near a collapsed archway, where Zhang Quan was already barking orders at the others, positioning them ahead of a locked stone door that pulsed faintly with sealed energy. Behind that door waited the Phantom General, a boss rated well above the squad's combined clearance level, according to the muttered conversation Yin Yu Tian overheard, while nobody bothered addressing him directly. The door opened on Zhang Quan's command, and the fight began badly within seconds. The Phantom General moved like smoke given shape, a translucent armored figure wielding a spectral halberd that passed through physical barriers as easily as air. It caught the squad's front line off guard on the first pass, 3 hunters sent sprawling before anyone landed a single hit in return. Yin Yu Tian held back near the rear, watching the creature's movement the way he'd watched the python days earlier, cataloging patterns nobody else seemed to notice. The halberd swept low, then high, then paused for exactly 1 breath before repeating the cycle. A flaw, small and precise, buried inside a boss the squad had been told was nearly unbeatable at their level. Before he could act on it, the general's spectral form lashed out toward Zhang Quan directly, catching him across the chest with an attack that shouldn't have connected physically at all. Zhang Quan dropped to one knee, his mutation-enhanced body seizing up, a visible paralysis spreading from the wound outward. He didn't call for backup. He didn't try to hold the line for his team. He slammed his palm against an emergency extraction rune sewn into his sleeve and vanished in a flash of teleportation light, leaving the rest of his squad standing exposed in front of an enraged boss. The remaining hunters panicked. 2 more fell within seconds, extraction runes flaring as they too abandoned the fight, until only Yin Yu Tian remained standing in the ruined chamber, alone with a boss the entire squad had failed to scratch. He didn't have an extraction rune. Recruits below C rank weren't issued them, a detail nobody had thought worth explaining beforehand. The Phantom General turned its attention toward the last body still standing, halberd rising for a killing strike. Yin Yu Tian's system flashed a warning across his vision, health projection dropping into a red zone that promised real damage if that blade connected. Beneath the warning, something else flickered into view, a skill he hadn't consciously unlocked, sitting dormant until this exact threshold of danger triggered its awakening. Inner strength available. He didn't stop to question it. He reached for whatever the notification offered, and warmth surged through his chest, sharpening his focus, steadying his grip on the short sword he'd trained for 4 straight nights in an empty room. The halberd came down. He met it with a block that shouldn't have held against a spectral weapon, steel meeting smoke and somehow not passing through, his enhanced strength anchoring the impact instead of collapsing under it. The general recoiled, genuinely surprised for the first time in the fight. Yin Yu Tian didn't waste the opening. He moved into the pattern he'd already mapped, ducking under the next high sweep, closing the distance during that 1-breath pause the creature always allowed itself between attacks. His blade found the gap in its armor at the base of the neck, driven with everything the inner strength skill had lent him. The Phantom General shattered into drifting motes of light, its massive form collapsing inward, until nothing remained but a single crystal hovering where its chest had been. The chamber went silent. Yin Yu Tian approached the crystal slowly, some quiet instinct telling him it mattered more than a simple reward. The system confirmed it a moment later. Rare item detected. Tear of Doom. Absorb to unlock hidden technique. He crushed it in his palm without hesitation. Knowledge flooded into his mind immediately after. Forms and footwork belonging to something the interface labeled Transcendent Fencing, an advanced style far beyond anything a fresh recruit should have had access to. He stood alone in the wreckage of the simulation chamber, breathing hard, a dead boss behind him, and an entire skill tree unlocked in front of him, and allowed himself one quiet second to register what had just happened before the extraction portal finally opened on its own. He walked out of the simulator into a debriefing room full of medics and supervisors, none of whom expected to see him standing upright, let alone unharmed. Zhang Quan sat nearby, already spinning a story for the officer taking notes, describing a boss too powerful for any recruit to survive, framing his own extraction as a tactical retreat meant to preserve the squad. He hadn't accounted for a witness walking out behind him with the Phantom General's crystal still glowing faintly in his palm. The room went quiet as recognition spread. Yin Yutian said nothing dramatic. He simply set the crystal on the debriefing table, badge still reading F rank, and let the evidence speak for itself. Fan Sui Shu arrived minutes later, having heard the commotion from an adjacent monitoring station. She listened to the medics confirm what the simulation logs already showed, that a lone F-rank recruit had solo killed a boss rated well above his squad's combined level, while his squad leader had abandoned the fight and lied about it afterward. Her expression hardened as she turned toward Zhang Quan. She didn't raise her voice, she simply informed him, in front of the full debriefing room, that his command was revoked effective immediately, and that his instructor would be answering for approving a recruit with his documented history of abandoning teammates under pressure. Zhang Quan's face flushed red, humiliation replacing his earlier confidence, and his eyes cut toward Yin Yutian with a hatred that promised this wasn't finished. He wasn't wrong. Word of the expulsion order spread through the training halls within hours, and it reached someone with far more influence than Zhang Quan ever had. Someone who had no intention of letting a corrupted mutant lose his position without a fight. Fan Chunui, the clan head's adopted son, requested a formal review that same evening. And a formal review, in a family obsessed with strength and hierarchy, could only be settled one way: a duel. Fan Chunui made his appearance the following morning, stepping into the review chamber with the calm authority of a man who rarely lost an argument. He carried himself the way elite hunters did, B-rank confidence wrapped in a tailored corporate uniform, every movement measured and deliberate. He argued that stripping Zhang Quan's command over a single incident set a dangerous precedent, that mutant berserkers carried volatile combat instincts that occasionally misfired under pressure, and that punishing him without a chance to prove himself again would waste a valuable asset. He proposed a public arena duel instead, framing it as fairness. Let the F-rank recruit and the disgraced squad leader settle the matter with steel, in front of witnesses, and let the result speak louder than any debriefing report. Fan Sui Shu recognized the maneuver for what it was. A stalling tactic dressed up as justice, designed to give Zhang Quan a stage where his raw power might overwhelm an opponent everyone still assumed was a fluke. But refusing the challenge publicly would look like favoritism toward an untested recruit, and she had no grounds to block it without undermining her own authority. She agreed, on one condition: the duel would be held in the main arena, open to any recruit who wanted to watch. Yin Yutian received the news through a formal notice slipped under his dorm door. He read it twice, mostly indifferent to the politics behind it, and noticed only that the notice listed the wrong start time by 11 minutes compared to the arena's posted schedule. He corrected the discrepancy in his head automatically, filed it away, and returned to sharpening the short sword he'd claimed as his own since the underground simulation. The arena filled quickly the next afternoon, recruits packing the stands 3 rows deep, drawn by rumors already spinning wildly through the training halls. Some had heard he'd solo killed a boss. Others insisted the debriefing report had been exaggerated, that no F-rank could possibly stand against a mutant berserker in open combat. Zhang Quan entered first, stripped down to combat gear, his altered eyes catching the arena lights in a way that unsettled the front rows. He'd requested a live-edge sword for the match, standard corporate steel sharpened to full lethality, rather than the blunted training blades typically used for internal disputes. Nobody stopped him. Humiliation demanded a real edge, apparently, and the review board had granted his request without much resistance. Yin Yutian stepped onto the sand a moment later, still wearing the same plain training uniform he'd worn every night in that empty room, his short sword strapped at his hip. Zhang Quan opened with a taunt loud enough for the stands to hear, reminding everyone that he'd taken down 2 B-rank monsters before his mutation ever stabilized, that an F-rank recruit swinging a borrowed sword stood no real chance against someone built for war. He punctuated the speech by slamming his blade against his own gauntlet. the metallic crack echoing through the arena. Yin Yu Tian said nothing. He simply drew his sword and settled into the stance his system had drilled into him across 4 sleepless nights, the same stance he'd used to split a boss's spectral armor in half. The referee dropped his hand. Zhang Quan closed the distance in a blur, mutation-enhanced speed carrying him faster than his bulk should have allowed, blades swinging in a wide horizontal arc meant to end the fight in one strike. Yin Yu Tian read the arc before it fully committed, the same way he'd read the Phantom General's halberd days earlier, and sidestepped with barely a foot of clearance. Zhang Quan's blade cut empty air, and the follow-through left him overextended for a fraction of a second. That fraction was enough. Yin Yu Tian's counter came through the newly unlocked fencing style, a technique that channeled focused energy along the blade's edge, extending its reach beyond what plain steel should allow. The strike caught Zhang Quan's sword at the midpoint, and the arena went silent as the blade fractured, then shattered entirely, fragments scattering across the sand like broken glass. Zhang Quan stood frozen, staring at the ruined hilt still clenched in his fist, disbelief written across his face, more clearly than any injury could show. The crowd's murmur rose into full noise within seconds, recruits leaning forward, some already pulling out their phones to record the aftermath. Fan Sui Shu watched from the official's box with her arms crossed, expression unreadable, though something close to satisfaction flickered at the corner of her mouth. The referee called the match. Zhang Quan didn't argue this time. He simply turned and walked off the sand, humiliation replacing whatever confidence he'd carried in. And within the week, his instructor's own position came under review alongside his own. Yin Yu Tian sheathed his sword and left the arena without acknowledging the crowd, already thinking ahead to whatever notification would greet him back in his room. Somewhere behind him, a strength sphere still insisted, on official record, that he remained nothing more than an F-rank recruit. The gap between what that machine measured and what he could actually do was starting to draw attention from people far more dangerous than a disgraced berserker. The deployment notice arrived 4 days later, assigning him to a squad designated Sabotage Squad 18 for an E-rank clearance mission inside a worm tunnel dungeon. On paper, it read as routine, a low-risk assignment suited to a recruit still officially ranked at the bottom of the ladder. He didn't know, walking into the briefing room that morning, that the assignment had been arranged specifically for him. He didn't know that Fan Chinui, still smarting from the public collapse of Zhang Quan's defense, had quietly redirected squad placements through a contact deep in personnel management. He didn't know that the squad's healer, a soft-spoken woman named Lan Chemo, had already accepted payment for a task that had nothing to do with healing. He only knew that his new squad mates greeted him with polite, distant smiles, the kind people wore when they'd already decided something about a person and had no intention of revealing it. Lan Chemo smiled the widest of all, offering to walk beside him during the descent, promising to keep a close eye on his vitals given his low rank and the tunnel's reputation for narrow, dangerous passages. He thanked her, unaware that her attention wasn't concern at all, but the patient calculation of someone who had already decided exactly where the tunnel would end for him. The worm tunnel dungeon opened beneath an unmarked service hatch on the city's outskirts, its entrance nothing more than a rusted grate leading down into darkness. Sabotage Squad 18 gathered around it that morning, running final equipment checks while Lan Chemo fussed over Yin Yu Tian's straps with a gentleness that read, to everyone watching, as simple professional care. He didn't question it. He had no reason to. His system flagged nothing unusual about her presence. No threat warning, no red pulse of danger. Whatever intuition his disorder had sharpened over weeks of training, it had never been built to detect betrayal disguised as kindness. They descended together, headlamps cutting narrow cones through packed earth and root systems, the tunnel walls slick with a faint bioluminescent residue left behind by whatever creatures burrowed through this stretch of ground. E-rank, according to the mission briefing, meant manageable danger. Low-level worm creatures, occasional cave collapses, nothing a properly equipped squad couldn't handle. 20 minutes in, the tunnel forked into 3 separate passages. The squad leader sent 2 members down the left branch to scout for a reported egg cluster, leaving Yin Yu Tian paired with Lan Chemo on the right, ostensibly to check a side chamber flagged on old survey maps. She led him through a narrow crawl space, chatting lightly about nothing in particular, her voice carrying an easy warmth that put him at ease despite the tunnel's oppressive quiet. Partway through, she paused beside a cluster of loose stones jammed into the passage wall, mentioning offhand that this section looked unstable. that he should step back while she checked it. He stepped back. The explosion came a half-second later, a compact charge she'd wedged into the stones days earlier, timed to bring the ceiling down directly where he'd been standing. His system flared a warning a fraction too late for conscious thought, but his body had already moved, some trained reflex from weeks of drilling throwing him sideways before the blast fully registered. Rock and dust rained down around him, burying half the passage, but he emerged from the collapse coughing, bruised, and very much alive. Lan Kimo's face, for just an instant, showed something other than concern. It vanished quickly, replaced by manufactured horror as she rushed to his side, insisting the tunnel must have been more unstable than the survey indicated, that they'd narrowly avoided disaster together. He believed her. He had no framework yet for suspecting a healer of attempted murder, and the exhaustion of the near miss left little room for careful analysis. She suggested they press forward rather than double back through the unstable section, guiding him deeper along a path that curved steadily upward, away from the rest of the squad, toward what she described as a scenic overlook, worth checking for hidden loot caches. The passage opened unexpectedly onto a wide stone ledge overlooking a black chasm, its bottom lost entirely to darkness even with headlamps aimed straight down. Cool air rose from the depths, carrying a faint mineral scent that suggested water somewhere far below. Lan Kimo stood near the edge, humming a soft, unfamiliar tune under her breath, gazing out at the drop with an expression that had shifted, subtly, into something calmer and colder than the warmth she'd worn throughout the descent. Yin Yutian approached the ledge beside her, glancing down into the chasm out of simple curiosity, his mind already drifting toward whatever quest notification might trigger from exploring uncharted terrain. She placed a hand on his shoulder, still humming, and told him, almost gently, that this was nothing personal. That corporate contracts paid better than any salary a healer could otherwise expect, and that Fan Chunui's reach extended further than most recruits understood. Then she pushed. He had no time to brace, no warning notification fast enough to save him this time. His footing gave way entirely, and the chasm swallowed him whole, darkness rushing up from every direction as the ledge disappeared above him. Lan Kimo watched the drop for exactly 3 seconds, confirmed no sound of impact reached back up, and turned to make her way back toward the rest of the squad, already rehearsing the story she'd tell about a tragic accident on unstable terrain. Yin Yutian fell for longer than should have been survivable, the chasm walls blurring past in the dark, wind tearing at his clothes as he plummeted toward whatever waited below. His system screamed warnings across his vision, fall damage projections climbing into lethal territory with every passing second. He forced himself to think instead of panic. His short sword remained strapped at his hip, and some instinct, half memory of the fencing forms burned into his mind by the Tear of Doom crystal, told him a blade dragged against stone might slow a fall enough to survive it. He drew the sword mid-plummet, angled it against the passing rock wall, and drove it into the stone with everything his inner strength skill could lend the motion. Sparks sprayed upward as steel screeched against rock, his descent slowing in violent, jarring increments, his shoulder nearly wrenched from its socket with each catch and release. He hit water instead of stone, plunging into a glowing underground lake that cushioned the last 30 feet of his fall into something merely bruising rather than fatal. He surfaced gasping, treading water in a cavern lit faintly by bioluminescent algae clinging to the walls, utterly alone, miles beneath the tunnel entrance he'd walked into that morning, trusting every person around him. He floated there for a long moment, catching his breath, processing the shape of what had just happened. The explosion, the overlook, the hand on his shoulder, gentle right up until it wasn't. Something cold settled into his chest, replacing the confusion. Not despair, something closer to focus. His system, indifferent to betrayal or survival instinct alike, flashed a fresh notification across his vision as he pulled himself toward the lake's rocky shore. New area discovered. Hidden layer. Objective, survive. He allowed himself a short, humorless breath at the timing of it, wringing water from his sleeves, and began scanning the cavern for a way forward. Whatever waited in this hidden layer, he intended to walk out of it, and when he eventually climbed back into daylight, Lan Kimo and the man who'd ordered this were going to learn exactly how badly they'd miscalculated. The cavern stretched out further than his headlamp could reach, its ceiling lost somewhere above the faint glow rising off the lake's algae-crusted surface. Yin Yutian pulled himself onto a shelf of dry rock and sat for a moment, letting his breathing settle, cataloging the damage his body had taken. Bruised ribs. A wrenched shoulder. Nothing broken, as far as he could tell, though the ache running down his arm suggested he'd find out for certain once the adrenaline wore off. His system offered no map, no marked exit, only the vague objective sitting in the corner of his vision demanding he survive whatever came next. He'd learned by now that vague objectives from this system rarely stayed simple for long. He rose and began following the shoreline, boots squelching against wet stone, when the first ghost moth found him. It emerged from a crack in the cavern wall, wings the size of dinner plates, pale and translucent, trailing a faint mist that shimmered oddly under his headlamp. It didn't attack immediately. It circled him twice, wings beating a slow, hypnotic rhythm, before darting in close enough that the mist trailing off its wings brushed against his exposed forearm. A burning itch spread from the contact point within seconds, sharp and chemical, unlike anything he'd felt before. His system flagged the sensation immediately. Neurotoxin detected. Paralysis onset. Estimated 90 seconds. He didn't panic. He drew his sword instead, forcing his sluggish arm through the motion before the paralysis could fully set in, and cut the moth out of the air on its next pass. It dissolved into fine dust that scattered across the water, but the poison already working through his veins didn't dissolve with it. His legs gave out beneath him. He hit the ground hard, fully conscious but unable to command his own limbs, staring up at a cavern ceiling he couldn't do anything about while the toxin ran its course. The 90 seconds felt considerably longer than that. When motion finally returned to his fingers, then his arms, then the rest of his body, his system logged something unexpected alongside the standard damage report. Toxin exposure recorded. Resistance threshold, 1/10. He filed the information away as he pushed himself upright. If resistance built through repeated exposure, and more of these moths waited somewhere in the dark ahead, then surviving this hidden layer might come down to how many times his body could absorb the same poison before it stopped working at all. He didn't love the math. He kept walking anyway. 3 more moths found him over the following hour, each encounter costing him another bout of paralysis, each bout shorter than the last as his resistance counter climbed steadily upward. By the 4th exposure, the paralysis lasted barely 20 seconds, his system confirming a growing immunity, building itself into his blood with each fresh dose. He eventually reached a stretch of shoreline where the lake pooled around a raised stone platform, half submerged, its surface carved with a pattern that had clearly once been symmetrical before time, and erosion wore one section down unevenly. A single tile sat sunken lower than the rest, throwing the entire altar's geometry off balance. He stopped walking the moment he saw it. The wrongness of the tile pulled at him instantly. The same compulsive itch that had once cost him a beating over a crooked heart of roses, now aimed at ancient stonework nobody else would have looked at twice. He crouched beside the platform, running his fingers along the sunken tile's edge, and began working it loose from its setting. It took nearly 20 minutes of careful prying, his shoulder protesting every motion, before the tile finally shifted free. He repositioned it, adjusting its angle by fractions of an inch until the altar's pattern locked back into perfect symmetry for what looked like the first time in centuries. The lake responded immediately. Water began draining away through some hidden mechanism beneath the platform, the level dropping steadily until the cavern floor emerged fully exposed, revealing a passage that had been submerged and hidden until his adjustment uncovered it. His system chimed a notification he hadn't seen before. Hidden layer unlocked. Access granted. He stared down into the newly revealed passage, damp stone steps leading further into darkness, and understood that whatever waited down there had been sealed away deliberately, kept hidden behind a puzzle nobody without his exact particular affliction could have solved by accident. He descended anyway. Turning back meant climbing a wall he had no way to climb, and forward, at least, offered the possibility of a path out. The passage opened into a wide chamber coated in thick strands of silk, pale and glistening under his headlamp, stretched between stalactites in patterns too deliberate to be random. Something large moved in the shadows at the chamber's far end, shifting weight audible even over the drip of water somewhere behind him. The Spider Queen emerged from the dark fully a moment later, easily 3 times his height, 8 segmented legs supporting a bloated abdomen that pulsed faintly with each movement. His system flagged the threat immediately, a rating far above anything he'd faced since the Phantom General. D-rank boss detected. Spider Queen. Caution advised. He barely had time to register the warning before the first strand of silk shot toward him, faster than anything that size should have moved. He dove sideways, rolling clear, but a second strand caught his ankle mid-motion, yanking him off balance and dragging him several feet across the stone floor before he managed to slice it free with a desperate swing of his blade. The queen advanced, several more strands lashing out in a coordinated pattern he didn't yet understand well enough to counter. One caught his sword arm, binding it against his side. Another wrapped around his legs, and within seconds he found himself hoisted off the ground entirely, suspended in a cocoon of silk that tightened with every motion he made to struggle free. The queen approached at a leisurely pace, in no apparent hurry, and he understood with growing dread exactly what she intended. Somewhere behind her, tucked against the chamber wall, a cluster of smaller shapes writhed inside their own silk sacks, newly hatched and hungry. She meant to feed him to them. His health bar ticked downward as her fangs grazed his shoulder, injecting something that burned far worse than the ghost moth's toxin had. His system's warning turned urgent, red pulses stacking across his vision, projecting a timeline that didn't favor him surviving long enough to think his way out of this the way he had with the python and the general. He forced his bound arm against the silk, feeling for the small dagger still sheathed at his boot, the one blade small enough that the cocoon's tight wrapping hadn't fully immobilized. His fingers found the hilt, and he began sawing at the silk binding his wrist, slow and desperate, while the poison spread further through his shoulder with every passing second. He needed time he didn't have, and somewhere at the edge of the chamber, half buried beneath a fallen strand of silk, a patch of pale, waxy leaves grew directly out of a crack in the stone. Leaves that looked, to anyone paying close enough attention, remarkably similar to something Wei Wei had once mentioned in an offhand comment about parasitic plants and the immunities they carried against the venom of whatever creatures they grew near. If he could reach them before the poison finished its work, he might walk out of this chamber after all. The dagger cut through the last strand binding his wrist just as the poison reached his elbow, a spreading numbness that made his fingers clumsy and slow. He dropped from the cocoon in a graceless heap, hitting the stone floor hard enough to jar what little breath he had left, and forced himself immediately into a crawl toward the pale leaves growing from the cavern wall. The Spider Queen noticed his escape and shrieked, a sound that vibrated through the chamber's silk strands like plucked wire, and began advancing with considerably less patience than before. He remembered Wei Wei's voice from some forgotten lecture hall, mentioning almost as an aside that parasitic growths near dangerous creatures often evolved their own resistance to whatever venom surrounded them, a survival trait that made them useful for exactly this kind of desperate situation. He hadn't thought much of the comment at the time. He thought about nothing else now. His numb fingers tore a handful of leaves free from the crack in the stone, and he crushed them against his poisoned shoulder without hesitation, grinding the pulp directly into the wound. A sharp, cold sensation spread outward from the contact point, fighting against the burning venom already working through his blood. His system registered the interaction a moment later. Toxin neutralized. Immunity recorded. Spider Queen venom. Feeling returned to his arm in a painful rush, pins and needles crawling from shoulder to fingertips, but he could move again, and that was enough. The queen closed the distance, fangs bared, clearly intent on finishing what the venom hadn't. He met her charge with everything the fencing style had taught him, ducking beneath her first strike and driving his blade upward into the soft underside of her abdomen, the one section not protected by chitinous plating. She reared back, shrieking again, and he used the opening to close further rather than retreat, dragging the blade sideways in a long, tearing cut that opened her from underside to flank. She collapsed sideways into her own webbing, legs curling inward, and went still. He stood over the body for a long moment, chest heaving, poison-scarred shoulder throbbing, and allowed himself to feel, briefly, the full weight of what he'd survived. Then his system chimed with a loot notification, and the moment passed. He found the storage ring nestled inside a hollow near the queen's abdomen, along with a fragment of carved bone that pulsed faintly with dormant energy, unlike anything the loot notification had labeled before. His system tagged it simply as unidentified relic fragment, offering no further explanation, and he pocketed it alongside the ring without spending much time puzzling over the mystery. The storage ring, once activated, revealed a small fortune in unclaimed magic crystals, apparently stockpiled inside the queen's nest over years of hunters who'd wandered too deep and never made it back out. He gathered the crystals into the ring's expanded storage space, filing away the number even he found difficult to believe, and began searching for a way back to the surface. The path out wound through a series of narrow tunnels branching off from the drained lakebed, eventually connecting to a maintenance shaft the original survey maps had apparently missed entirely. He climbed for what felt like an hour, following faint drafts of fresher air, until he finally emerged through a rusted grate into daylight several hundred meters from the tunnel's original entrance. He stood there for a moment, blinking against the sun, filthy and bruised, and carrying enough crystals to fund a small corporation, before making his way back toward the extraction point where Sabotage Squad 18 had gathered. He found them exactly where he expected, clustered around a corporate debriefing officer, Lan Chemo at the center of the group, with tears streaming convincingly down her face. She was describing, in halting, grief-stricken detail, the tragic accident that had claimed their newest recruit's life. An unstable section of tunnel collapsing without warning, a young man swallowed by darkness before anyone could reach him. Several squad members nodded along, murmuring sympathy, one already drafting language for an official incident report that would close the matter cleanly and quietly. Yin Yu Tian walked into the middle of the gathering without announcement. The reaction rippled through the group in stages. First confusion, then disbelief, then a slow, dawning horror on Lan Chemo's face, as she registered exactly who was standing in front of her, dripping cave water and very much alive. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't accuse her directly, not yet, not in front of witnesses who might scatter or warn her before he'd finished. He simply activated his storage ring and dumped its contents onto the debriefing table, an avalanche of magic crystals spilling across the wood in a pile that dwarfed anything the squad had recovered from their sanctioned portion of the mission. The debriefing officer's pen stopped moving mid-sentence. Lan Chemo's tears dried up remarkably fast. He let the silence stretch just long enough for the weight of it to land, crystals still settling across the table, before he finally spoke, voice level and unhurried, describing an unstable section of tunnel that had collapsed suspiciously close to a charge he'd found wedged into the stone, and an overlook where a trusted squad healer had hummed a quiet tune while pushing him into a chasm she clearly hadn't expected him to survive. The officer's gaze shifted slowly toward Lan Chemo, who had gone very pale, her earlier grief replaced by the particular stillness of someone watching a carefully built story collapse in real time. She didn't confess outright. She stammered something about miscommunication, about the tunnel genuinely being unstable, about panic clouding her judgment in the moment. Nobody in the room appeared to believe her, least of all the officer now flipping back through her own account for inconsistencies she'd somehow missed the first time through. Yin Yu Tian said nothing further. He let the crystals and the accusations sit there together on the table, evidence enough for anyone paying proper attention, and turned to walk toward the medical tent, leaving the fallout to unfold behind him. He didn't yet know how far up the chain this betrayal actually reached, or that the name behind it belonged to someone with far more power than a frightened squad healer. That answer was still waiting for him, tangled up in corporate politics he'd barely begun to understand, but it was coming. And when it arrived, he intended to be standing exactly where Lan Chemo had least expected him to be, alive and no longer easy to underestimate. The Security Council convened 3 days later, called into session specifically to address the worm tunnel incident, now formally logged as an attempted assassination rather than an accident. Yin Yu Tian sat near the back of the chamber, still healing from the venom scarring on his shoulder, watching a room full of corporate executives argue over the fate of a squad healer who had, by every account already on record, tried to murder him twice in one afternoon. Lan Chemo wasn't present. She'd been quietly detained the day after the debriefing, her testimony recorded separately, and rumors already circulated that she'd named names under pressure, though nobody in the chamber confirmed exactly who those names belonged to. Fan Chenui sat near the front of the council table, composed and unreadable, offering measured commentary about the dangers of unstable dungeon terrain and the unfortunate tendency of junior staff to panic under pressure. He suggested, gently, that perhaps this entire matter had been overblown, that a genuinely malicious plot seemed unlikely, given Lan Chemo's clean record prior to the incident. Director Fan Man stood before anyone else could second the sentiment. He was older than most of the council, a weapons mentor who'd trained 3 generations of Fan family hunters, respected enough that even Fan Chenui's easy authority dimmed slightly in his presence. He didn't bother with careful diplomatic language. He stated plainly that a recruit had returned from a routine mission carrying evidence of a planted explosive and a documented assault, that dismissing this as panic insulted the intelligence of everyone in the room, and that whoever had arranged the assignment placing an untested F rank alone with a healer possessing a clean record deserved scrutiny just as much as the healer herself. The chamber went quiet in a way that made Fan Chunui's jaw tighten, just slightly, before his expression smoothed back into practiced neutrality. He didn't argue further. He simply thanked Director Fan Man for his input, noted it for the record, and moved the council toward unrelated business. But something in the exchange had shifted. Yin Yu Tian, watching from the back of the room, caught the brief look Fan Chunui sent toward the older director on his way out, and filed the expression away alongside everything else his system had trained him to notice without effort. He didn't yet understand what he'd witnessed. He only understood, with the same instinct that once flagged a crooked flower arrangement as unbearably wrong, that something about that look promised trouble for the man who'd just defended him. Director Fan Man didn't make it home from the corporate tower that night. Security footage later showed him crossing the underground parking structure alone, briefcase in hand, when a figure stepped out from between two vehicles and closed the distance before he had time to react. The attack lasted less than 10 seconds. Whoever struck him left behind a small signature card, marked with an unfamiliar symbol the investigators identified as belonging to a rogue mercenary faction known only as Ronin, a calling card meant to point suspicion toward outside enemies rather than anyone inside the Fan corporate structure. Yin Yu Tian learned the news the following morning, delivered secondhand through a training hall already buzzing with grief and confusion. He stood very still when he heard it, something cold settling into his chest that had nothing to do with his disorder, and everything to do with the specific, deliberate cruelty of the timing. A man had stood up for him in front of a full council, and less than a full day later, that man was dead. He thought about the look Fan Chunui had sent toward Fan Man on his way out of the chamber. He thought about a signature card that pointed suspicion everywhere except where it actually belonged. He had no proof yet, nothing concrete enough to bring before a council that trusted its adopted heir without question, but the shape of it sat clear in his mind regardless, the same way a crooked altar tile had once told him exactly where to press. Fan Chunui hadn't ordered Lan Kimo's failed assassination attempt out of simple cruelty. He'd ordered it because something about Yin Yu Tian's presence threatened a plan already in motion, a plan large enough that he was willing to murder a beloved mentor rather than risk that plan unraveling in front of a security council. Yin Yu Tian didn't know yet how deep that plan actually ran. He didn't know about a rival family called Qian, about a corporate identity built entirely on lies, about a heiress who would soon find herself dragged into the middle of it all. He only knew that a debt now sat unpaid, and that his system, indifferent as always to grief or vengeance, had already begun tracking a fresh objective in the corner of his vision, one with no clear reward listed, and no clean way to close it out. He closed his eyes for a moment, standing alone in the training hall while the rest of the recruits murmured around him, and made a quiet decision that had nothing to do with any quest prompt at all. Whatever Fan Chunui was building toward, Yin Yu Tian intended to be standing in the middle of it when it finally came apart.